expect the Independent National Electoral Commission by now to have, we have those in the Situation Room, political parties, they have the results. So what the Independent National Electoral Commission is just doing is the physical, results, to come in and they collate it together and they declare the next winner. So we get the person, any moment from now, we'll be getting the person that will be occupying the Olisadebe house. Good evening to our viewers in Nigeria and those watching around the world. We are taking over in the next 30 minutes from our Lagos studio as we continue to bring you minute-by-minute updates on happenings in Edo State as we await the final declaration from the Independent National Electoral Commission on who will be the next governor for the next 4 years. And we are live from our Abuja studio. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ayodele Ozubakun. Let's begin the program by reminding you that any minute from now, that the Independent National Electoral Commission there in Edo State will declare, I think they are waiting for the last local government to declare the result. And we have Cynthia Mbamalu of YIAGA Africa. She's the executive director of YIAGA Africa. And Cynthia, we are going to see if the three big tests that was set up for the Independent National Electoral Commission, that's the defining issues ahead of this election, if the electoral umpire, if they were able to pass this test, the YIAGA Africa set the resilience test, the impartiality test, and the integrity test. Now, going to the resilience test, you were talking about, will voters defy early warning and signs of violence or rainfall to show up and vote and protect their votes? Cynthia, what happened? Director of YIAGA Africa there, and before this election, they had some parameters and that they are going to judge INEC with. They were talking about the resilience test, the impartiality test, and the integrity test. Cynthia, tell us about what went down yesterday.
Thank you for highlighting the test that we talked about. Like you mentioned, we had highlighted the impartiality test. The impartiality test focuses on the security agencies, the resilience test for the citizens, and then the integrity test. And maybe I'll start from the part of the security agencies. And I did see from our data yesterday, we did observe the deployment of security across board. However, there were locations where we did not see security personnel present. But the later part of the day, towards collation, was where there were several reports of interference of the process of collation by security, especially in three local governments, Espako West, Inoredo, and Ikowaka. And if you remember earlier today, YIAGA Africa with other civil society organizations had issued a joint statement calling for INEC to ensure that there is due compliance to the rules for collation and calling on the security to ensure non-interference. And then the bigger question on integrity. For us, integrity borders on several aspects of the process. The first is the requirements to comply with the Electoral Act when it comes to the rules for election administration and to comply with the INEC guidelines for the elections, especially as it relates to the process of accreditation and voting and the result collation. And that for us is important to assess integrity on the part of the Electoral Commission. So compliance with the rule, that's the first part. The second is level around professionalism of its staff and their neutrality in the conduct of the election, and INEC's ability to ensure transparency in the process. Now, what we have seen in this election is, and for the commencement of polls, one major challenge we did observe was the late commencement of polls. And I think for a lot of media partners and civil society observers, that was a... I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Cynthia. I wanted to quote you that the early report YIAGA Africa published gave, 41% to the number of polling units that came between 7 a.m. By INEC, arrived between 7:30 a.m. and gave 41% of the polling units for the arrival by 7:30.
Yes, but if you look at the commencement ought to be by 8:30. At 8:30, if you look at the data,
17%.
We had about 17%.
That's abysmal.
And that's for us because the rule is for polling units opens at 8:30, and we had released further data to even show a disaggregation across the senatorial districts. You see that places like Edo North and Edo Central, they had late commencement, and then also the Edo South. And the question was, with a lot of investment gone into the planning of these elections, learning from 2020 and 2016 in Edo, why did we still experience this late commencement of polls? In fact, some polling units did not commence until 12:30 p.m. before they commenced voting. And so that was a challenge. We do acknowledge that, yes, it rained, but the rain was we all know it's a rainy season, so the rain was not a surprise. Everyone expected it to rain. But the question is, why did we have this commencement? However, and if you see our further data, we did show that by 2:30, 50% of polling units still had voters on the queue because, like I said, late commencement meant some processes would proceed beyond 2:30. But beyond that is the question around the compliance of the rule. And important things we're looking out for is, one, INEC's application of the rules on overvoting. The Electoral Act is clear on overvoting, where the total number of votes is more than the number of accredited voters. Then the results for that polling unit would be cancelled or would be invalidated, because the idea is, if, for instance, you have 100 people accredited, total number of votes should not be more than 100, because the BVAS captures the numbers of accredited voters. And so one thing we're looking at for this election was INEC's application of that rule when it came to overvoting. What determined the cancellation? Is it just the law? Were there other things to be considered? Things like disruption. INEC's guideline has also said where there's disruption of the process, snatching of ballot box, stopping of ballot box, those kinds of issues that impede the quality of the process, that the result for that unit would also be cancelled. So that was one part of the test of integrity. The other is at the collation level. Remember that at the polling unit, votes are counted, results are entered into the result sheet from ECHA, and that is where the BVAS is used to take a picture and upload on the IRES before moving to the World Collation Center. Now, in assessing this process, the collation is the weakest link. And so a lot of focus for us was also on how INEC applied these rules for collation. Things like addressing computational inaccuracies, for instance, and ensuring that if there is overvoting, that at the word collation level, the rules on cancellation is applied in line with the law and not arbitrarily, which we've seen in some elections where collation officers can, at their own whims and caprices, decide to either cancel or not cancel without following the guidelines and the rules. However, by the time we got to the LGA collation was when we observed the disruption.
Hello, Cynthia, are you there? Okay.
Observer in the field, specifically from Esako West. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So looking at the voter turnout projection, which YIAGA Africa projected 22.5%. Now, from Edo North, you projected 31.1%. From Edo Central, you projected 26.7%. And Edo South, 16.6%. In all, 22.5%. Doing a kind of comparative analysis to what happened 4 years ago and 8 years ago, how would you rate this exercise?
I would say this is lower turnout, and that's the second test, the resilience test on the part of citizens. We recorded lower turnout based on our projection. In 2016, turnout was actually 32.7%. By 2020, the turnout dropped. 2016, And by 2020, the turnout for governorship elections dropped by 8%. So that gave us at about 24%. And we were expecting that at least this time around, they would
kind of
be,
improvement,
even if it's just a push, a kind of improvement. And although the pre-elections, so our pre-election assessment projected that there may be lower turnout in these elections, but we were hoping that some election day miracles would happen. However, that wasn't the case. As you can see, we still experience decline. In fact, a further decline from where we were in 2020 in Edo, which is also far more lower than what we had in 2016. And the question is, what exactly is happening, and why do we have lesser number of voters coming out? And Ayo, actually, yesterday going around, observing, even within Oredo has the larger percentage of registered voters, and PVCs collected. That's the biggest. I mean, after Ikoboka, Ikoboka and Oredo have the larger numbers of registered voters within Edo South. Well, you will go to some polling units. You just had officials, very few numbers of voters coming out. You look at the register, you see a large number. You're wondering where are the voters. That is exactly that's the heartbeat. Especially within city, you also expect younger people to come out, because with the scarcity of resources, you have younger people moving from the villages. How do I put that? Moving to the capital and staying more in the city. So you expect you have more youth population within these regions, and yet we did see low turnout. But I think there were some voters who still came out regardless. I know in the rain, you had people who stood in the queue and waited even though they were drenched in the rain. And so you have that level of commitment on one hand, but on the other hand is a general sense of disinterest in the electoral process. And this for us is a bigger question. Because how can we keep...
Apart from the by-election in Nasarawa that we had in Nasarawa State 4 years ago, Edo election 4 years ago was like the benchmark, was the starting point of uploading results into the IREV, that according to what the Independent National Electoral Commission told us. We saw it 4 years ago. Now, when you see what they did 4 years ago and what they did since yesterday, how would you assess it?
Well, I would say it's perhaps not, because from 4 years ago, we've seen a lot of improvements. So, for instance, 4 years ago, you needed to have a password to log on to the IREV. You could not just go onto the IREV. You needed to create an ID and a password to log on to the IREV. But currently, for the IREV, you just go on the INEC elections result viewing portal, and you can see the result as they are uploaded. So that's one thing, at least ensuring that access was made easier for everyone.
100%.
Yes, and what we had in this election, at least what we saw from midnight yesterday, you already had close to about 90% or so of the results uploaded. Although the platform went down at some point between the midnight, between that 1 a.m., 2 a.m. or so. I know most of us were still, but we were following, most of us were watching the platform. For those of us,
we're still not ready for this.
Yeah, and they are still, at the moment, we have also partners who are still assessing the results on the platform. For instance, you see some polling unit level results that you can see is a clear case of overvoting uploaded on the platform. There are also instances where the result that is on the platform is not corresponding with what the observers observe at the polling unit level. And so there are questions. So it's beyond just the upload. Yes, it's good that we have better access, and we've seen some improvement in the upload. It's about the quality of the results. Remember, Ayo, that for this election, transparency is key, and is one of the standards we would use to assess INEC under our integrity test.
Now, when you look at, in terms of security arrangement, in terms of, you had a kind of threat assessment before this election. Now, with what you saw on ground, led by DIG Frank Umba, how would you assess security?
Well, I think first, at the commencement of polls, or before the elections, I actually want to commend the police. Before the elections, they had this security meeting with stakeholders in the state, so including observer groups and even media and media partners in the state. And that for me is important to have that conversation. I know DIG Mbamalu was there, and with other leadership of the Nigerian police. And then they also provided lines of communication and for instances of incidents in the field. So that for me is an improvement. However, one of the things we did see was that while we expected to see about 35,000, I mean, that was the plan from the police, about 35,000 officers were to be deployed in Edo. And our data did show that in about 5% of our sample polling units, there were no security personnel present. And we had them in 95%, good number, but we expected to have in 100% of the polling units. That's one. The second is the conduct of security personnel. We did see some level of professionalism in some of the locations. So I wouldn't say it's a general situation, but there were isolated cases where security personnel were a bit overzealous. I know myself and one of our partners doing the observation and other CSOs have also complained. There were times where we were asked, while we were roving to observe, you are asked to show your ID card, your INEX accreditation tag, you show it. They say, ask you to come down from your car, introduce yourself, who are you? Ordinarily, showing the identity is enough because that's the only thing INEC gives to us, our INEC accreditation tag. But I think perhaps those are officers who either did not listen during training or just wanted to be overzealous. But then there's a bigger question, around the complicity on the part of police where there are electoral offenses, as simple as vote buying. Not simple, as grievous as vote buying, because I do believe that vote buying should no longer be treated with levity.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, do you have cases of vote buying?
Oh yes.
Reported.
We actually from our data we did report yesterday instances of vote buying. I think it's recorded in about more than 5 LGAs based on our data, and we part of what our data indicated was the least sum was 10,000 naira. So voters were
10,000
selling their votes. 10,000 naira. I mean, this is probably one of the highest we've seen in the recent elections.
Wow.
Some states you have 1,000, 2,000, some states 5,000. But this time around, the minimum that we recorded was 10,000 naira. Yes, and most times this vote buying was done in the presence of security personnel. They just looked the other way or acted disinterested. In fact, in some locations, you can tell that one of the party agents what his or her role is to pay, because they are staying and watching to see how the voters thumbprint, and then they extort them outside and they give them something. And let me just put it out here that vote buying was witnessed by both agents of the APC and agents of the PDP. And so it was not a one-party affair. We did observe vote buying conducted or carried out by agents of both the APC and the PDP. And this is also a bigger question.
So you had reports from the two major dominant parties?
Yes. We got reports, and at least naming these two, those were based on what we observed. Some other groups may have seen other parties, but this was what we observed. Expectedly too, those were the two parties that deployed agents to over 95% of the
because I wanted to ask you, 18 people actually participated in this exercise. At the end of the day, it's only the regular corporates we get to hear of, APC and PDP. Where is Zolumide Akpata? It was so loud before this exercise, but talking about structures on ground, talking about agents on ground.
Well, the thing is, in a multi-party democracy, there's a tendency for a dominance of two parties. Think about almost all democracies that we follow. The US, for instance, has close to 1,000 political parties, but you have the dominance of the Democrats and the Republicans. If you go to South Africa, it's dominance. It used to be dominance of two parties before the emergence of parties like EFF and now MP, the last party. If you go to other, most countries, there's a likelihood of the dominance of two parties in multi-party democracy. So we're not surprised to see this. However, there was an expectation that there would be some sort of a three-horse race at the period of campaign, the pre-election race, especially with the Labour Party, because of the 2023 elections. But we need to understand that governorship elections, the politics for governorship elections is different from the politics of presidential elections. National elections happen within a context with its own dynamics. That's quite different from the state level. At state level, there are several things considered, as simple as the politics of senatorial districts. There are times where the zoning happens a lot more at the state level because conversation around this zone has presented and that zone is supposed to present. That's one. The second is when you talk about structure. When we talk about structure, most times people think it's a bit abstract, or there's a lot of work that needs to structure. It requires your capacity to mobilize across local government, because you know
and
the
to have
elections
your agents and your foot soldiers on ground.
Exactly, you need to show some presence across local government. I mean, in our final pre-election assessment of political party campaign, our data did show that the most coverage of the Labour Party in Edo State for campaigns was about 70 something percent of the local government areas. So you had the APC and the PDP covering over 95%.
But the candidate said individuals conducted polls and is leading on individual polls. It was all about.
Well, polls have their value, but you know, for like I said, that is why the national election is different. At the state elections, to vote in the state elections, you need to be a registered voter in that state, and only those who are registered in that state can vote in the state, right? And as long as you're registered in the state, you can vote. And so when it comes to polling, the question is, what audience are you polling? Are you polling the right respondents? Are they registered voters in the state where the election is taking place? And so I do believe in multi-party democracy, and I think for every party that wants to contest elections, there's a lot of work that requires to be done in going to different levels and ensuring that you have someone across every local government. One of the ways to track how parties engage and perform is the ability to deploy party agents across polling units. And so if at the point of deployment, because you know, at the point of deployment, our data was still showing that for the Labour Party's deployment was about 77% of the polling unit, but you had the
70%
PDP and the APC scoring, yes, I was going to get the exact
of the entire state polling units.
Of the polling units, and you had
they weren't able to cover 100%
in 95 and above percent. So you see, their deployment, they had a lot more deployment. So you can already imagine that if you don't have agents deployed across polling units, it also could affect your work.
Okay, YIAGA complained about the disruptions of coalition process in Oredo and Ikpoba Okia. So are you following up with that? What's the situation with that report?
Yes. So we had issued a statement and highlighted that. In fact, there was another report in Ego. So it's in Sako West, Ikpoba and Oredo. And subsequently,
and those are
reports for yes. And for us, it was a call to the Electoral Commission, because we are only observer groups. All we can do is highlight an infraction and call on the Electoral Commission to act. What we do believe is that INEC has the power within the Electoral Act. Section 65 of the Electoral Act gives INEC the power to review results if there are complaints. Actually, if the results are not declared voluntarily, that is, if they are declared under duress, or if they are not declared in line with the Electoral Act and the INEC guidelines, then INEC can review.
Okay,
and so
Cynthia,
we are